Hey guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, with a look at the new LG G2. This is the Verizon version, which has a few differences from the international GSM version, also sold at AT&T. So the Verizon version has the same software, running Android 4.2.2, running the same quad-core Snapdragon 800 processor, clocked at 2.26 gigahertz. We also have 2 gigs of RAM and that large 5.2-inch 1080p IPS LCD display. So let's go ahead and crack this open, take a look. So this is available in two colors, black or white. The black is actually kind of a bluish color. So on the back you can see it's got that sort of plasticky design. And we're going to take a close look at this in just a minute while we take a look at the accessories inside. So we've got some Verizon literature. We have our USB charging cable as well as a wall adapter. Now the interesting thing here is that this is a higher speed wall charger. So for example, if you connect anything other than this charger, you'll get a little notification on the lock screen telling you to connect the original charger to get a faster charge. All right, so let's get to our phone. First, peeling off all of the plastic. So we got this back panel here. We got a little plastic covering our back buttons here, which is a new feature for the LG G2. So you can see we have plastic around the camera module as well. We're going to peel this off here. All right, so let's peel that away. On the front, or at least on the side, we also have another piece of plastic surrounding the micro USB charging port here. There we go. And on the front, we have another panel here which actually highlights some of the features here. So you can see the headphone jack, as well as the USB charging port and the location for your SIM tray. All right, so I'm just going to remove that front plastic. We also have a little plastic surrounding the side bezel here. All right, so let's go and take a look at the design of the LG G2. As you can see, it's kind of a glossy plastic. The black plastic here kind of has a weave pattern if you look really closely at it. Along the back, you'll see one of its hallmark design features, which is the back key. So the volume rocker and the sleep wake or power on switch is on the back of the phone this time instead of on the side or the edge of the phone. We also have our 13 megapixel autofocusing camera capable of recording video at 1080p at 60 frames per second. We also have an LED flash. This camera also has optical image stabilization. Now the difference here you can see with the Verizon version is that the buttons back here are a little smaller. They're also flush. So they don't stick out like they do with the GSM version. So the idea here is when you place it flat on the surface, it doesn't stick up or rock around on the table. So I kind of like that, but the buttons are smaller and harder to feel for. So you can see on the back we have an LED notification light on the back around the power button. You also have your volume rocker, which also have dual functions, and we'll talk about that when we talk about software. So on the back we have our LG branding. Along the edge you'll find your USB, micro USB charging port along with our speaker, our mouthpiece or microphone here, as well as our headphone jack. Not much along the side, but you do have your SIM card here, our SIM tray, which can be popped off with your fingernail. So there you go, slides right out, and you can pop it back in. Now along the top you'll find an IR blaster, and of course this does have software that utilizes it, so you can control your AV equipment. You also have your microphone. Now along the front you'll find a 2.1 megapixel front-firing camera capable of recording video at 1080p at 30 frames per second. We also have a proximity sensor, an LED notification light. We have our earpiece as well as our Verizon branding here. Now along the bottom of the display you'll find your LG branding and no off-screen Android controls because they are all on screen with the LG G2. Alright, so let's go and take a look at the user interface starting with the knock-on feature. So if you double tap the screen while it's off, it will wake up for you. You can also double tap it again to put it to sleep. Now if you're in an app, for example, let's go to the Chrome app here, you can't double tap somewhere on this to put it to sleep, but you can up top near the notification panel. Now the lock screen also has lock screen widgets, which you do have to activate by default. You can see that you can add more here. So for example, we could add our Gmail widget, and we could select exactly what we want to appear here. So now if we go to the lock screen, you can swipe between them. You can also swipe all the way to the right to launch your camera app. So here we have our home screen, and we can pinch in to see our wallpaper. We can pinch in and out again to see all of our home screens, and you can select which one you want to be your home screen just by selecting this little utility here. So we can zoom in and out again to change this. Go back to home. We can swipe down to get to our notification panel. So you can see we have lots of toggles up here. We have quick memo, which takes a screen grab and then allows you to make notes and save it to your camera folder. So you can see you can handwrite on it. So you could use a stylus. Of course, this does not include one, but you could use a stylus or something, or just your finger. So for example, I can draw on it. There we go. Now we also have quick remote, sound, brightness, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, GPS, rotation lock, airplane, quiet mode, which allows you to set a do not disturb feature. And if you want to access any of these settings, just tap and hold them. Takes you right to that setting panel. You have screen timeout, wireless storage. So you can, this is kind of a neat feature here. So if you enable wireless storage, this basically allows you to access the files on your device from a computer. All you have to do on the same Wi-Fi network is go to the address provided here, and they also provide a username and password for entering that information. So you could access your device without actually physically connecting it to your computer. We also have data. We do have Miracast available here, so this does work with Miracast devices, so you can broadcast your display or your audio to a Miracast television, for example. We have NFC, we have Q-Slide, we have Sync, and we have the ability to edit these features as well. So we can edit how these are ordered, and we can edit what appears there as well. So you can see we have lots of granularity here in terms of customization. Now, as you can see, we also have our Q-Slide apps here. So, for example, we can take a note and we can change the transparency here to sort of fade it in the background and continue doing something else. So that prevents the window from being active. So you can continue researching on your web browser, and then when you're ready to go back to taking notes, you just change the opacity to full again and move it around and start entering your text. Now, you can open up to 2 of these apps. So, for example, if you want to open up the calculator, you can do that as well. And again, change the transparency so you can move between them. Now you can also resize them just by dragging the right corner. Now you can also add or remove home screens here, and you can see you're kind of locked down to how many you can have, but if you want to remove them, just take them up there and get rid of them. Now you can also edit your home screen just by tapping and holding it, and you get this big editing feature here. So you can go to your apps, your widgets, as well as your wallpapers. You can change that here. So for example, if you want to add any of your apps to your home screen here, just tap and drag them up here. And if you want to remove them, just tap and hold them, take them up to the remove option up here, and as you can see, you get this little animation here and a little sound effect. Now, LG really likes customization. One of the things you can do is edit your app icon. So if you tap and hold it, you get this little editing brush up here. If you go here, you can see exactly which photo icon you have available to yourself, and you can pick ones that you want. And of course, you could load others if you prefer. So if you go to photo icon, you can edit your own, add a new one, that sort of thing. So you have lots of customization. Now you can also create folders just by dragging and dropping icons over each other. Automatically creates the folder, but of course you have lots of editing options here. So if you tap and hold this, you can resize the folder. Let's see if we, there we go. You can also edit other details here. So if you tap the arrow icon again, you can actually change the background color. So if you want blue, you can also rename it. There you go. Now, as you can see, our Android control panel here is also translucent, so it gives you a little more edge-to-edge screen real estate. Now, these are the default configuration, but these are also customizable, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So we have our home button, we have our back button, and we have our settings button, which of course is contextual. Now, if you tap and hold the menu button or home button, it takes you to your app switcher or your recent apps, and you can clear them or close them all. You can also go to your task manager here to manage them. Now, if you swipe up on the home button, you can see you get to Google Now, or you get to VoiceMate, which is LG's sort of voice assistant. We also have Quick Memo. So if you launch Quick Memo, again, it takes a screen grab of whatever you're doing and allows you to edit and take notes. Now, let's go and take a look at VoiceMate. What's the weather like tomorrow?
On Tuesday, your current location will be mostly cloudy.
How tall is the new World Trade Center?
Searching the web for how tall is the new World Trade Center.
Now you can also do other things like launch apps with that. Launch Chrome.
Launching Chrome application.
And you can do other things like make appointments, set alarms, timers, and that sort of thing. Now, of course, we also have Google Now integration. Open the YouTube app. Set an appointment for 3 p.m. Now from the lock screen, you can also say LG Mobile. What's the weather like tomorrow in Chicago?
On Tuesday, Chicago will have showers all day.
Now you can also input text with your keyboard, or you can go to sort of a windowed Q-Slide view, which you can move this around and keep this around in the background. Now these back buttons also have dual functions. So for example, while the screen is locked, if you tap and hold the volume down button, you can launch the camera app. If you press and hold the volume up button, you get to Quick Memo. Now if you tap and hold both the volume down button and the lock button at the same time, you can also create a screen grab. Now, as you can see, with our volume controls, we have lots of settings here. So from ringtones to notifications to touch feedback and system, etc., etc. So lots of volume controls. Again, very similar to something like TouchWiz on the Galaxy phones. Now, next up, let's take a look at our settings, which can reveal a lot of things about this device. It's always the most fun place to go to on any phone, at least for me, because you don't know what's there until you dig in. So we have our settings here. As you can see, we have our tab viewer, which you can modify with the settings button here. So you can switch to list view, which is actually the default view for the Verizon model. So let's go back to tab viewer here. So with tab view, you have your networks, sound, display, as well as general. So with network, we have the basics, airplane mode, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth settings, mobile data. We can change our call information, our call settings, share and connect. So under here, we have things like NFC technology. We can enable or disable direct/Android beam or direct Wi-Fi or Android beam. Smart share beam. We also have Miracast, which you can enable. And we have wireless storage, which is a feature I showed you earlier, which basically allows you to wirelessly access your device's storage on your computer using the local Wi-Fi network. Now under sound, we have a few interesting things here. So for example, we have quiet mode, which is basically the do not disturb mode. Vibrate strength, so you can change the vibrate strength to specific things here. Smart ringtone, so increases the phone's ringtone volume automatically in noisy environments. We also have our phone ringtones, and we're going to get back to that in just a second. We have incoming call vibration. So if you go to here, you can change that as well. You also have ringtones with vibration, which you can enable. Voice notifications, so it will read out incoming call and message events automatically. So you can enable that. Of course, it's off by default. We also have our notification sounds. And this is where things get a little interesting. Now, LG has created some new ringtones using the Vienna Boys Choir. So if you want to listen to it. So that is the Vienna Boys Choir singing Life is Good. And there's quite a few things like that. In fact, if we go to the ringtones, which I want to get back to here, you can get a more substantial taste of it. So let's go to the Vienna Boys Choir. Should be right up here. Alright, so you get the idea here, and personally I really don't like them, so if they are on by default, and some of them are, this is where you go to turn them off. Now we also have our display settings, so you can go to your home screen and change, for example, the theme. So if you go to the theme here, you can see lots of customization, so you can see the basic theme or the marshmallow theme, which is kind of a whimsical theme. There you go. You can also set your wallpaper. Of course, you can also do this from the home screen just by tapping and holding the home screen to get to your editor. You also have the screen wipe effect, which you can change. Again, there's lots of them. You also have portrait view only. Now, by default, we have portrait view only. So if you disable this and go to your home screen now, you can actually switch it to landscape orientation, which is a little unusual for a phone this size. Most of them don't do this. Now you can edit those shortcuts on the lock screen by going to the shortcuts control panel. Go to shortcuts here. And you can see that we can select which ones we want. So we can delete the shortcut or we can replace it with Chrome and click save. So now if we go to the lock screen, you should be able to see it right there and you can quickly launch it. As I indicated, even these buttons are customizable. So if we go to display and under front touch buttons, here you can change your recipe. So the default recipe is the one I actually prefer, but you can rearrange them if you prefer. You can also add a feature here, which is kind of useful if you find this phone to be too large. So if you enable one of these, you can see you can now activate your drop-down shade just by tapping it. So maybe instead of having to swipe down all the time from the drop-down shade, you can keep your hand in a neutral position and just access it that way. Now you can also change the theme of the background here. So for example, the standard configuration is just plain white, but you can do white with gradation, so you can see it changes up a bit. You also have black gradation, or you have, let's go back here, you have lovely pink. And of course, you can also enable transparent mode. This only works with the lock screen. So for example, if you go to lock screen, it goes into transparent mode. But if you go into one of the apps, you can see it doesn't support that transparency, so it does fill in for you. Now you also have your screen brightness settings here. You can also set it to auto mode or not. We have screen timeout. You can set to specific time intervals. You also have the screen off effect. So you can set it to retro TV, black hole, or simple. So let me just try black hole this here and see what it looks like. There you go. Now we also have that Daydream clock, which allows you to change what displays on your display while it's charging at nighttime. So for example, you can do this color animation, you can do the photo frame or the photo table, or you can just do the clock. For example, and if you want to take a look at it, we can do the Start Now feature. So let's just do Start Now just to show you what it looks like. Now, similar to Samsung, we have smart screen technology, so it doesn't allow the screen to turn off while you're looking at it, so it's able to use the camera to detect the presence of your eyes. So Samsung calls this Smart State technology. We also have Smart Video, which Samsung calls Smart Pause. Basically, it pauses video playback, again, if your eyes move away from the display, and it resumes playback when you move them back to the display. Now you can also change your notification light settings here, so you can see we have lots of options here. So we have a true red, green, blue LED light, which is quite nice here. Now under General, we have our gestures, and one of them we're familiar with right now is Knock On. We also have Slide Aside, which is a feature I'll also demonstrate. Answer Me. So basically, if you pick up the phone to your ear, place it to your ear, it will automatically answer the phone for you when it's ringing. You can also silence incoming calls by flipping the phone over. You can also fade out the ringtone. So during an incoming call, just pick up the phone from a flat surface to fade out the ringtone. You can also snooze or stop an alarm just by flipping it over. You can also pause video again by flipping it over. And you can move home screen items just by tapping and holding them and tilting the device side to side. We also have motion sensor calibration under this panel. We also have our one-handed operation, which works with a few things such as the dial keypad, LG keyboard. So we go to the phone dialer here, and we tap the menu button here. You can enable this to one-handed operation. There you go. Now, I don't find this phone to be particularly large. This is more useful on something like maybe the Note series where the phones are particularly large. But this, to me, is pretty comfortable. But, of course, I have somewhat large hands. And, of course, you can flip it from left hand to right hand side. Now, incidentally, you also have access to your voice assistant under the phone app, which makes it pretty easy. Now, under our storage options, we do have 32 gigs. This is non-expandable, so you have 32 gigs available to you, and out of that, only about 23 gigs are available to the end user. We have our battery settings here, so we can see what's taking up our battery life. So we can tap on that to get to more information. Now, battery percentage you can enable, which is off by default, and we do have a battery saver mode, which allows you to change exactly how you want that to behave. So you can turn off auto sync, turn off Wi-Fi when it's not being used, Bluetooth, vibration, brightness, turn down this brightness, that sort of thing. It also automatically enables when the battery is down to 30%. You have your location access, you have your guest mode, which allows you to enable a guest mode feature so somebody can use your phone. Now we can also add our accounts here, and you can see that we can add our Amazon account, email accounts, Google accounts, Exchange accounts, date and time settings, accessibility, PC connection, so you can manage your connection options here as well, your accessory options, and also your about phone information, which should show that we are running Android 4.2.2 somewhere in here. Let's see, software information. Let's go right here. There we go, 4.2.2. Now I just want to take a look at our keyboard here, which also works in landscape orientation here. So you can see it goes to full screen mode. We do have a full QWERTY keyboard with our number row up top, which I always find handy. Now, if you want to change your settings or your input options, just tap and hold this control to the space bar, to the left of the space bar. And this is, again, very similar to the TouchWiz interface. So we have our voice keyboard, we have our handwriting keyboard. Even though we don't have an included stylus, you do have a handwriting keyboard. We also have our clipboard as well as settings. So if we go to settings here, it takes you to your settings options. So we have auto capitalization, auto punctuation, voice input, path input, so enter a word by drawing a path through all of the letters, so we're kind of familiar with that. That's enabled by default. We also have handwriting mode, and we do have settings here, so if you go to your settings control, you can see exactly how this works. Alright, so let's take a look at this keyboard in action, first with voice. This is a test of the voice keyboard, period. Alright, that works out pretty well. So we can go back to our full QWERTY keyboard. Let's go back to text input, or handwriting input, and let's see how this works. That didn't work out too well, so let's try again. So there you go. It can work with your finger, but of course it's best with the stylus, and you can jump back to your keyboard this way as well. Now we can try continuous input. So that also works pretty well. Now LG has something called Slide Aside, which is sort of a multitasking solution that's very different from what Samsung does. So what you can do is sort of minimize or freeze 3 apps at the same time and access them quickly. So let me show you how this works. So I'm just going to launch Chrome. Then I'm going to use a 3-finger gesture to slide it aside. So that's saved. And in fact, you see a little notification up here letting me know that 1 app has been saved. Let me launch the Gmail app, slide that aside. There you go, 2 apps saved. And let me launch the email app, slide it aside, Again, 3 apps saved. In fact, if you bring down the drop-down menu, you can see it right here. But you can either go to the drop-down menu to get to it, or you can use the 3-finger gesture to bring them up. So I can slide them out of the way like that by swiping up and letting them go, or I can X them out, or I can jump to those apps. Now, if you look up here, you can see that I now have 2 apps saved because the one app has been brought to forward, is no longer saved. So if I want to resave it, I have to do that again. So it can get a little tricky here. It's pretty easy to lose all of your apps all of a sudden, the ones you wanted to sort of keep minimized. It's pretty easy to lose them. So again, swipe to the side here, jump to them. If you want to resave it, just go back there again. Now, just to show you, again, if you go to the notification shade here, you can tap slide aside to bring up all 3 of those apps, and again, you can swipe them out of the way to close them. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that camera app, which is really full-featured. Again, we have a 13-megapixel sensor with 1080p video at 60 frames per second. It also has OIS, or optical image stabilization, so it has real physical stabilization, not just software stabilization. So you can see we can switch between our still mode and video mode right up here. Let's go to our still mode just to show you this. So you can see we have a fairly large metering matrix. So if you get back to that matrix, you can see just how much of the scene the camera is metering. That's thanks to that powerful processor. So you can take a photo. Be careful not to hit the home button, which I often do here. That's the disadvantage of having the on-screen home button. There we go. You can also use the volume controls as your camera, for your camera controls. You have your gallery here, which you can tap on, and you can switch between video mode going up here. So when you record video, you can also shoot stills at the same time. As you can see, it just flashes the screen and it's silent while you're doing that. You can pause it and resume it later if you prefer, or you can stop it. Now on the left-hand side, we have tons of options here, and I'm not going to go through all of them. So for example, we have editing options, so we can edit our quick menu. This is basically what this is called. You can edit which buttons appear here. So for example, if we want our cheese shutter, or we want to put our camera swapper back there, you can do that. You can also have your scene mode. So right now I have normal. You can also do shot and clear, and if you're not sure what each one is, they will explain it for you. HDR, panorama, so you can see a little indicator here, and you can tell it to not repeat that. You also have VR panorama, the burst shot, beauty shot, dual camera, as well as time catch shot. What is that? I'm not sure what that is. Time catch shot captures the moments before you press the shutter. Scene, you have your normal, portrait, landscape, sports, sunset. So if you click on any one of those, you get the idea here. See, it changes the color. Gonna go to normal here. And you have lots of settings here. You have your cheese shutter, your brightness controls. So you have your manual brightness if you want. Your focus control. Image size, so you can select your image size, so 13 megapixels. ISO, you can set it to auto. White balance, color effect, timer, geotagging, shutter sound, and volume key control, so you can use your volume keys to either capture or zoom your scene. Now under settings, we can enable the cheese shutter or voice command. So if you can click that to on, you can say something like cheese, smile, whiskey, kimchi, or LG to release the shutter. So let's try this. Cheese, whiskey, LG, kimchi. So you get the idea. Now, similar to Samsung, we also have a dual shot mode, which is available under the scene mode here. So let's see, dual camera. They call it dual camera. Samsung calls it dual shot, which is what I still tend to call it. But dual shot mode basically records both cameras at the same time, and you can switch between which camera is active just by tapping the thumbnail. You can move it around. You can't resize it, but you can change the border around it. So there you go. You have lots and lots of options. Again, very similar to what Samsung does with dual shot. Now, without a doubt, my favorite feature of the LG G2 is the display and the way it's designed to fit in the palm of your hand with very little bezel. So if you look at the edges, you can see a really tiny bezel despite the large display. So they've been able to redesign the digitizer so there are less pathways, electrical pathways, along the edge of the phone. So they've been able to shrink down the bezel and pretty much fill our palm with just the display. So even though it's a large display, 5.2 inches, it almost sounds like Note territory, but this is kind of a standard size phone. They've been able to really shrink it down to get us that large display. So they've kind of leaped ahead of Samsung's GS4 in that way. Now over 5.2 inches, that 1080p display gives us really sharp resolution. So you can see even the smallest text is pin sharp. So even if you don't want to pinch in and out to zoom, you could in theory use a magnifying glass to even read this text. It's pretty amazing how well they've done here. Now in terms of performance, this is a really quick operating phone, definitely better than something like Samsung's Touch was, even on the Note 3, which has similar specs, or even better specs. Note 3 does a pretty good job, especially compared to the GS4, but this is definitely a smoother performer than the GS4. Phones that have heavy skin over them. Android phones with a heavy skin over them tend to bog down, even with high-end specs, but this software tends to be really well optimized, and even with all the transitions and animations, with this high-resolution display, it does a really good job. So I'm definitely impressed overall with the way this phone feels and performs on a day-to-day basis. Now, just to give an idea of the performance of the LG G2 versus some other popular phones, so here we have the iPhone 5S, which has some of the highest scores here, especially on the single-core score, much higher than the other devices. Not as high as the Note 3 on the multi-core score, but you can see that the LG G2 is pretty high up there. Not as high as the Note 3, but pretty close. And here we have the Moto X, which is about half the performance of these devices. Now this gives you an idea of the relative size differences between the GS4 and the LG G2, and you can basically see that the LG G2 and GS4 look about the same in size overall. It's just that the LG G2 has a larger display. Now this is lighter than the LG G2, but the LG is still pretty light. So as you can see, the thinness, a little not as thin as the GS4 as well, but you do have a much larger battery here. Now in terms of design and ergonomics, I'm actually a big fan of the LG G2, except for those ringtones, but the LG G2 has that nice solid plastic construction. It doesn't have a removable back panel, so you can't swap out the battery, you can't add your own SD card. But you have a nice solid piece of plastic on the back, which feels really rigid, has a nice smooth texture to it, feels really comfortable in the hand because it has those rounded edges, fairly thin at those edges, and you have a nice flat back panel, so it rests evenly on the surface. And as you can see, the Verizon version has a redesigned or a different design of those back buttons. So instead of having that center button that sticks out, this is flush. So that means it's flush to the surface, so when you lay it on a table, it doesn't raise up or it doesn't rock around in any way. So that's kind of a nice benefit, but the only problem is that these buttons are kind of difficult to feel for. They both feel about the same. There are really no major indicators here, at least that I can feel, which sort of highlight what each one is. So definitely not the most ergonomic setup. I prefer a more conventional setup. I'd prefer if they were along the side. I don't really see the benefits of having them back here. Again, you can see a little notification light on the back. So definitely not a, to me, it's not a big drawback. It's something you can get used to, but I find myself doing this a lot to find where my finger is on the back and make sure I'm not pressing the lock button or the volume up and down button instead of what I intend to do. Now, in conclusion, I think the big selling feature for me is this display. So that 5.2-inch LCD IPS display, I think, is the best on the market today. This is a reason to buy the phone, if nothing else. You also get impressive performance with that Snapdragon 800 processor, which is state-of-the-art right now. You get 2 gigs of RAM, which are able to keep up with the software of this phone. And you have an excellent camera with 13 megapixels, lots and lots of settings, with 60 frames per second with optical image stabilization, so a really good camera. Definitely impressed overall by it. Maybe my only complaint with this device is the speaker quality. It tends to be a little tinny. You have the speaker down here, so I'd like to see a better performing speaker in that regard, especially when you're playing back video on this device. Now, like Samsung, there are a lot of built-in software features, and like Samsung, I often don't use any of them. So some of them are beneficial, such as the fact that you can lift the phone to your ear to answer a call. I actually find that very useful, but for the most part, a lot of these software features don't work well enough to be useful, especially that Q slide, not the Q slide, but the slide aside feature, which I don't find very useful. It tends to require a lot of maintenance, and it can be really frustrating to use. So a lot of these features aren't that useful, but if you can find use for them, maybe they will be for you. But of course, you can ignore all the software features and you're still left with a superb piece of hardware, and one I can definitely recommend. So that's going to do for me in this video. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you again in the next one. What's going on, guys? Mike here, the Detroit Borg, testing out the front-firing camera of the LG G2. Again, this is a 2.1 megapixel sensor. We're capable of recording video at 1080p at 30 frames per second. This also has stereo microphones, so you should see pretty good picture quality and pretty good audio quality. Hey Zoe, how's it going? How's it going, little girl? Are you sick of being filmed yet, huh? Let's get in the shot, okay? There's 2 of you. Playtime, huh? Is it playtime?